long before the desert winds carried stories across the sands, long before travelers looked upon the great stone monuments that would one day rise beside the Nile, there was only the river. The Nile moved quietly through the land. Its waters flowed from distant places far to the south, carrying life into a world that might otherwise have been dry and silent. Year after year, season after season, the river followed its ancient path. It flooded the fields, left behind rich dark soil, and then slowly returned to its banks. The people of Egypt depended upon this rhythm. They woke with it. They worked with it. They planned their lives around it. In the cool hours before sunrise, villages stirred gently awake. Small cooking fires sent thin streams of smoke into the pale morning sky. Bakers prepared bread from grain harvested during the previous season. Farmers checked their tools before walking toward the fields. Children listened to birds calling from clusters of palm trees. Dogs stretched in doorways. Boats rocked softly along the shore. The world felt calm and predictable. The river promised another day. As generations passed, villages became towns. Towns became cities. The rulers of Egypt gained power, and the kingdom grew stronger. Yet even during these early times, women held important places within society. Ancient Egypt was different from many other kingdoms of the ancient world. Women could own property. They could inherit wealth. They could manage households and businesses. Some became priestesses. Some became advisors. Some stood beside kings and helped guide the kingdom itself. The title of queen carried great meaning. A queen was more than the wife of a ruler. She represented stability. She represented harmony. She represented the balance that Egyptians believed was necessary for the world to function properly. In temples and palaces, artists carefully painted images of royal women. Their faces appeared calm. Their posture appeared graceful. They often wore elegant linen garments that moved lightly in the breeze. Gold jewelry reflected sunlight. Colorful stones decorated necklaces and crowns. To the people of Egypt, these women were symbols of dignity and order. One of the earliest royal women remembered by history was a queen named Merneith. The details of her life remain distant and mysterious. Thousands of years have passed since she lived. Many records have vanished. Many stories have been lost. Yet traces remain. Archaeologists discovered evidence suggesting that Merneith may have ruled Egypt during a very early period of its history. This possibility makes her one of the first known women connected directly to royal authority. Imagine Egypt during her lifetime. The Great Pyramids did not yet exist. The familiar monuments that people associate with ancient Egypt were still far in the future. The kingdom itself was young. Its rulers worked to strengthen their authority over lands stretching along the Nile. Boats moved between settlements carrying grain, pottery, and stone. Messengers traveled dusty roads beneath the sun. Officials kept records on sheets of papyrus. Craftsmen shaped tools from copper. Every day, ordinary life continued beneath the watchful eyes of the gods. Within this world, Merneith occupied an extraordinary position. Some historians believe she may have served as a regent for a young king. Others suggest she may have ruled more directly. The truth remains hidden among fragments of history. But her importance is clear enough that she received honors usually reserved for rulers. Her burial place was large and impressive. Her name appeared among kings. Even after thousands of years, these clues remain. They whisper softly across time. They suggest that Egypt recognized strength and authority in a woman long before many other civilizations would do the same. The palace where Merneith lived would have been filled with activity. Servants carried baskets of food through shaded corridors. Officials arrived with reports from distant regions. Priests performed ceremonies honoring the gods. Scribes sat cross-legged, carefully recording information with brushes and ink. The smell of fresh bread drifted through kitchens. The sounds of conversation echoed through open courtyards. Yet amid all this movement, there were moments of stillness. Ancient Egyptian architecture welcomed light and air. Sunlight entered through open spaces. Pools reflected the sky. Gardens provided cool places for rest. Flowers bloomed beside walkways. Birds settled among trees. Even within centers of power, nature remained close. The queen's responsibilities were many. Royal life was not simply luxury and ceremony. A queen often participated in religious events. She appeared before the people. She helped maintain the image of stability that was so important to Egyptian society. Every action carried meaning. Every public appearance communicated a message. The kingdom was orderly. The kingdom was strong. The kingdom remained under divine protection. For ordinary people, life continued according to familiar patterns. At sunrise, farmers entered the fields. They planted grain, harvested crops, and repaired irrigation channels. Women prepared meals, cared for children, managed household tasks, and participated in local trade. Fishermen worked along the riverbanks. Potters shaped clay vessels. Builders cut stone. Merchants traveled between settlements. The rhythm of daily life connected everyone. Whether living in a palace or a small village, people depended upon the Nile. As evening approached, temperatures cooled. The golden light of sunset spread across the landscape. Families gathered together. Stories were shared. Food was eaten slowly. The stars appeared one by one above the desert. Many Egyptians believed these stars were connected to the divine world. Looking upward, they felt surrounded by forces greater than themselves. The queens of Egypt lived within this spiritual landscape. Religion touched nearly every aspect of life. Temples stood as centers of worship and administration. Priests performed rituals intended to maintain harmony between humanity and the gods. Queens frequently played important religious roles. Their presence reinforced the sacred nature of kingship. In Egyptian belief, order and balance were precious things. Chaos always existed beyond the edges of civilization. The ruler's duty was to preserve harmony. The queen helped support this mission. As the years passed, Merneptah's era faded into history. New rulers came. New cities grew. Generations lived and died along the river. The Nile continued flowing exactly as it always had. Yet the memory of powerful royal women did not disappear. Instead, it became part of Egypt's story. A quiet beginning. A distant example. A reminder that authority could sometimes rest in the hands of a queen. The centuries ahead would bring remarkable women. Some would guide kings. Some would rule kingdoms. Some would leave monuments that still stand today. Their stories would unfold slowly along the banks of the Nile, beneath endless skies and beside waters that never stopped moving. And as the river continued its patient journey through Egypt, the age of even greater queens was slowly approaching. The Nile flowed onward. Its waters did not pause for kings, queens, or the passing of centuries. Each year the river rose. Each year it spread across the fields. Each year it left behind rich soil that allowed Egypt to flourish. The people watched these changes with calm familiarity. The rhythm was ancient. It was dependable. It connected every generation to those who had come before. As time moved forward, Egypt became stronger. Its rulers commanded larger territories. Its cities expanded. Its temples grew more impressive. Stone buildings replaced simpler structures in many places. Skilled craftsmen developed new techniques. Scribes filled countless scrolls with records, stories, and prayers. The kingdom matured slowly, like a tree growing beside the riverbank. And with that growth came queens whose influence reached far beyond the walls of their homes. Many royal women of ancient Egypt lived lives that history remembers only in fragments. Their names appear briefly on temple walls. Their images survive on carved stone. Sometimes only a few traces remain. Yet even these small pieces reveal something important. Queens occupied positions of extraordinary respect. They were not hidden figures standing silently behind powerful men. Often they participated directly in religious ceremonies, diplomatic events, and matters of state. The title of Great Royal Wife carried immense honor. A queen helped represent the divine nature of kingship itself. She appeared beside the pharaoh during important occasions. She participated in festivals. She offered gifts to the gods. She stood as a symbol of harmony and continuity. To understand these women, it helps to imagine the world around them. Morning sunlight filled the courtyards of royal residences. Palm trees sway gently in the breeze. Servants swept stone pathways before the heat of the day arrived. Water splashed softly from decorative pools. The scent of flowers drifted through gardens carefully maintained by workers. In shaded halls, officials gathered to discuss taxes, harvests, construction projects, and trade. Egypt's government required constant attention. The kingdom stretched for hundreds of miles along the Nile. Messages traveled by boat. Orders moved from city to city. Records had to be kept. Resources had to be managed. Within this complex system, queens often played meaningful roles. One royal woman who stands out from this distant period is Queen Khas. Like many early queens, her story contains mysteries. Historians continue to study inscriptions and monuments connected to her life. What makes her especially interesting is the unusual way she was described. Some evidence suggests she may have held authority that approached the status of a ruler. Her titles have inspired debate for many years. The ancient carvings are not entirely clear. Yet they hint at something remarkable. A woman occupying a position of exceptional power. Her tomb still stands near the Great Pyramids at Giza. Even today, visitors can look upon the remains of this ancient structure and wonder about the life she lived. Thousands of years ago, workers carried stone blocks beneath the sun to create monuments like these. The labor was immense. The planning required extraordinary organization. Every stone had to be shaped and transported. Every project demanded careful coordination. The rulers of Egypt demonstrated their power through such achievements. Queens became part of that visual language. Their images appeared in carvings and inscriptions. Their names were preserved alongside those of kings. The Great Pyramid Age itself was a fascinating world. Imagine standing near the Nile during that era. The river reflects the bright sky. Boats move slowly across the water. Workers transport supplies along dusty roads. Priests perform rituals in temples. Farmers guide oxen through fertile fields. Far beyond the cultivated land, the desert stretches endlessly toward the horizon. Against that desert stand the monuments that still inspire wonder today. For the people who lived there, these structures were not ancient. They were new. They represented living power. Queens witnessed the construction of these monuments. They participated in ceremonies connected to them. Their lives unfolded within the same world that produced some of humanity's most enduring creations. At night, the royal residences became quieter. Oil lamps flickered softly. The day's heat slowly faded. Musicians sometimes performed gentle melodies on harps and flutes. Conversations continued in private chambers. The stars appeared above Egypt. The sky seemed vast and endless. Ancient Egyptians paid close attention to these celestial lights. The movements of stars helped guide religious beliefs and practical activities alike. Many people viewed the heavens as part of a divine order connecting gods, rulers, and ordinary life. Queens participated fully in this sacred world. Religion was woven into nearly every aspect of existence. Temples were not merely places of worship. They served as economic centers, educational institutions, and administrative hubs. Large numbers of people worked within temple complexes. Priests managed land and resources. Artisans created statues and ceremonial objects. Scribes maintained records. Royal women often held important religious titles that increased their influence. These responsibilities provided queens with opportunities to shape public life. Their authority was visible. Their presence mattered. As generations passed, Egypt entered new periods of prosperity and change. Dynasties rose and fell. Families gained power and eventually surrendered it to others. Yet throughout these transitions, royal women remained essential figures within the kingdom. The role of queen evolved gradually. Each generation added new examples of female leadership. Each queen left traces for future centuries to discover. Sometimes those traces were large monuments. Sometimes they were inscriptions carved into stone. Sometimes they were small objects buried with care and preserved by the dry desert climate. Together, these fragments create a picture of women whose influence extended far beyond the private sphere. One particularly striking feature of Egyptian society was its relatively flexible view of female authority. The pharaoh was usually male. That much was true. Yet Egyptian culture did not entirely reject the possibility of women holding significant power. This distinction would become increasingly important as history moved forward. The foundations were already being established. The examples of women like Merneith and Khantkhaz demonstrated that authority could sometimes flow through queens as well as kings. For ordinary Egyptians, daily life continued much as it always had. People rose before sunrise. They worked in fields, workshops, markets, and homes. Children learned skills from parents and relatives. Families gathered in the evenings. The smell of baking bread filled villages. Fishing boats returned to shore. Potters fired clay vessels in hot kilns. The routines of everyday life created stability. While rulers governed from palaces and temples, most people experienced history through these familiar moments. Yet the actions of queens and kings still touched their lives. A successful harvest brought prosperity. A well-managed government provided order. Religious ceremonies reinforced a sense of connection between humanity and the divine. The queen played her role within this larger system. Her image appeared during festivals. Her name was spoken during rituals. Her presence symbolized continuity. The centuries flowed onward. The Nile remained patient. The stars continued crossing the night sky. And gradually, the stage was being prepared for some of the most powerful and influential queens Egypt would ever know. Women whose names would survive not merely as companions to rulers, but as remarkable figures in their own right. Their stories waited just beyond the horizon of time. Like the first light of dawn appearing above the eastern desert. Slowly. Quietly. Surely. The age of great queens was drawing nearer. The river continued its endless journey. Day after day, year after year, the Nile carried life through Egypt just as it always had. Villages rose and fell. Children grew into adults. Kings ruled, grew old, and passed into memory. Yet the river remained. Its waters reflected the same stars. Its banks welcomed the same birds. Its gentle currents connected generations separated by centuries. As time moved forward, Egypt entered a period of uncertainty. There were years when the kingdom was not fully united. Foreign rulers known today as the Hyksos gained control over parts of northern Egypt. Their arrival brought changes to the land. New customs appeared. New weapons arrived. New political struggles emerged. For ordinary people, daily life still continued. Farmers planted crops. Fishermen cast nets into the river. Women baked bread and brewed beer. Children played beneath the shade of palm trees. Yet beneath these familiar routines, Egypt faced challenges that touched every level of society. The old balance had been disturbed. The kingdom was divided. And during such times, strong leaders became especially important. One of the most remarkable women to emerge from this era was Queen Ahotep. Her story begins not with grand monuments or enormous temples, but with determination during a difficult chapter in Egyptian history. Ahotep lived during a time when Egypt's future was uncertain. The southern city of Thebes became a center of resistance against foreign control. The rulers there hoped to reunite the kingdom. It was not an easy task. The struggle lasted many years. Families lived through periods of tension and conflict. Messages traveled between cities carrying news from distant regions. Soldiers marched across dusty roads. Leaders worked carefully to maintain stability. Within this world, Ahotep became a figure of immense importance. The exact details of her daily activities have been softened by time, but ancient records suggest that she played a significant role in protecting and guiding the kingdom. She was not simply observing events from a distance. She was helping shape them. Imagine Thebes during her lifetime. The city rested beside the Nile, surrounded by fertile land and desert hills. Boats moved steadily along the river. Markets filled with merchants selling grain, vegetables, cloth, pottery, and tools. Temple bells and ceremonial music occasionally drifted through the air. Workers moved through busy streets carrying supplies. Priests entered temple courtyards before sunrise. Life continued with its familiar rhythm. Yet everyone understood that Egypt was living through unusual times. The future remained uncertain. In the royal palace, Ahotep would have been surrounded by constant activity. Officials arrived with reports. Military leaders discussed strategy. Messengers carried information from distant settlements. Decisions needed to be made carefully. The safety of the kingdom depended upon wise leadership. Ancient inscriptions suggest that Ahotep helped maintain order when circumstances were difficult. Some historians believe she acted as a stabilizing force while younger rulers prepared to assume greater responsibilities. This role required intelligence, patience, and authority. The people of Egypt valued stability deeply. They believed that order was essential for the world to function properly. When chaos threatened, leaders were expected to restore balance. Ahotep appears to have embraced that responsibility. The respect she earned became visible after her death. Among the treasures discovered in her burial were objects associated with military achievement. These findings are unusual and significant. They suggest that her contributions were recognized as extraordinary. Ancient Egyptians did not distribute such honors lightly. The objects found with her indicate a woman who played an important role during a critical period. As evening settled across Thebes, daily life became quieter. The heat of the day faded. Families gathered for meals. Oil lamps glowed softly in homes and courtyards. The smell of fresh bread mixed with the scent of the river breeze. Children listened to stories told by parents and grandparents. Musicians played gentle melodies on stringed instruments. The stars appeared above the city. Somewhere within the royal residence, Ahotep likely experienced these same peaceful evenings, though her responsibilities remained far greater than those of most people. Leadership rarely ended with sunset. There were always reports to review. There were always concerns to consider. There were always plans for the future. And yet, even powerful queens lived within the rhythms of ordinary human life. They watched the sun rise. They listened to the wind. They shared meals with family members. They experienced moments of joy, worry, hope, and reflection. These quiet human experiences connect us to them across thousands of years. As the struggle for Egypt's reunification continued, Ahotep's family became central to the story. Her sons would play major roles in restoring Egyptian power. The work of one generation flowed into the next. The efforts of mothers influenced the achievements of sons. The stability she helped preserve created opportunities for future success. History often focuses on dramatic events. Battles. Coronations. Monuments. Yet many important achievements begin in quieter ways. They begin with guidance. With patience. With careful decisions made over many years. Ahotep's legacy appears to belong to this kind of leadership. A steady hand during uncertain times. A source of continuity when continuity was needed most. As Egypt gradually regained strength, confidence returned. The dream of a united kingdom once again seemed possible. People could imagine a future in which the land was whole. The Nile flowed from south to north through a single, strong Egypt. Temples prospered. Trade expanded. Communities flourished. The possibility of renewal grew stronger. And at the center of this transformation stood a royal family whose influence would shape the future. Among them was Ahotep. A queen. A mother. A protector of stability. Her story reminds us that power does not always appear in dramatic gestures. Sometimes it appears through endurance. Through wisdom. Through the ability to guide others through difficult years. Long after her lifetime ended, Egyptians continued to remember her. The honors associated with her burial suggest genuine admiration. Her memory survived because her contributions mattered. She helped preserve the foundations upon which future generations would build. The Nile continued flowing beside the city of Thebes. Its waters reflected the changing light of dawn and dusk. Its currents carried boats loaded with grain and stone. Its presence remained constant while history unfolded along its banks. And as Egypt moved closer to a new era of strength and prosperity, another remarkable queen was preparing to step onto the stage of history. A woman whose influence would become even more visible. A woman whose name would endure through temples, monuments, and stories told across millennia. The age of Egypt's most famous queens was beginning to emerge. Slowly. Like the first sunlight touching the river at dawn. Quietly. Like a breeze moving through reeds beside the Nile. The story was only just beginning. Morning arrived gently over the Nile. A pale golden light spread across the water. The first birds called from the reeds. Fishermen prepared their boats. Farmers stepped into fields still cool from the night air. Thin wisps of smoke rose from cooking fires as families began another day. The river remained calm. It had witnessed centuries of change. It had watched kingdoms rise and kingdoms struggle. Now it flowed through a land beginning to heal. The efforts of leaders like Ahotep had helped guide Egypt through difficult years. The dream of a united kingdom was becoming reality once again. The foreign rulers who had controlled parts of the land were gradually driven away. Egyptian power was returning. With this renewal came one of the most respected queens in all of ancient Egyptian history. Her name was Nefertari. For many generations after her death, Egyptians continued to honor her memory. This alone tells us something remarkable. Many queens were respected during their lifetimes. Only a few became deeply admired for centuries afterward. Nefertari was one of those rare women. She lived during a time of rebuilding. The kingdom was entering what historians now call the New Kingdom, one of Egypt's most powerful and prosperous eras. Temples expanded. Trade routes stretched farther. Art flourished. The authority of the pharaoh grew stronger. And beside the rulers of this new age stood Nefertari. Imagine the city of Thebes during her lifetime. The city buzzed with activity. Boats crowded the riverbanks. Markets overflowed with goods from different regions. Merchants carried baskets filled with fruits, vegetables, oils, and cloth. Artisans worked patiently in workshops. Stonecutters shaped blocks for temples. Painters decorated walls with vivid colors. Goldsmiths crafted delicate jewelry. Everywhere there was a sense of purpose. Egypt was growing stronger. The people could feel it. Within this world, Nefertari held extraordinary influence. She was not merely a queen standing beside a king. She became a central figure within the royal family and within religious life. Ancient records show that she held important titles and responsibilities. One title in particular gave her significant authority connected to major religious institutions. Religion and government were closely linked in Egypt. Control over important religious positions often brought considerable influence. Temples managed land, resources, workers, and wealth. A queen connected to these institutions held real power. The respect shown toward Nefertari suggests that her role extended far beyond ceremony. She became one of the defining royal women of her age. Life within the royal court was busy. Messengers arrived daily. Officials discussed construction projects. Priests organized ceremonies. Foreign visitors sometimes brought gifts and news from distant lands. The palace was a center of administration as well as a home. Corridors echoed with footsteps. Courtyards filled with sunlight. Gardens offered peaceful places away from constant activity. Pools reflected the sky. Trees provided shade during hot afternoons. It is easy to imagine Nefertari walking through these spaces. Perhaps she paused beside a garden pool. Perhaps she listened to musicians performing during a festival. Perhaps she watched preparations for important ceremonies. Like all human beings, she lived not only among grand events but also within countless ordinary moments. The new kingdom brought renewed confidence to Egypt. Military successes increased security. Trade brought valuable goods from distant regions. Ships traveled across seas. Caravans crossed deserts. Gold, incense, precious stones, fine woods, and exotic animals arrived from foreign lands. The wealth flowing into Egypt supported new building projects. Temples grew larger. Statues became more impressive. Artists refined their skills. The kingdom entered a period of extraordinary achievement. Yet prosperity required careful management. It required stability. It required trusted leaders. Nefertari helped provide that stability. Her image appears frequently in surviving monuments. Her presence was woven into the public life of Egypt. People recognized her importance. Generations later, they continued to remember her. This lasting admiration became especially visible in the community of workers who built royal tombs. These craftsmen and laborers lived near the Valley of the Kings. Long after Nefertari's lifetime, many of them honored her almost as a protective figure. Her memory became part of their spiritual world. Few queens achieved such enduring respect. The fact that ordinary people remembered her long after her death speaks volumes about her reputation. As evening settled over Thebes, temple walls glowed softly in the fading light. The western hills turned shades of gold and amber. The river reflected the colors of sunset. Boats drifted quietly toward shore. The day's work gradually ended. Families gathered together. Meals were shared. Stories were told. Children listened carefully to the voices of parents and grandparents. Life continued through simple routines. Even during times of prosperity, these small moments remained important. The greatness of Egypt rested not only upon kings and queens but also upon countless ordinary people. Farmers harvested grain. Builders shaped stone. Scribes recorded information. Merchants traded goods. Priests performed rituals. Each person contributed to the larger whole. Queens like Nefertari understood this interconnected world. Their responsibilities touched every level of society. The festivals of ancient Egypt were particularly important. During these celebrations, temples came alive with music and ceremony. Priests carried sacred statues. Crowds gathered to watch processions. Offerings were presented to the gods. Food and drink were shared. The atmosphere blended reverence with community spirit. Queens frequently participated in these events. Their appearance reinforced the sacred and political unity of the kingdom. For many Egyptians, seeing the royal family during a festival was a powerful experience. It reminded them that order still existed. The gods still watched over the land. The Nile still flowed. The world remained balanced. As the years passed, Nefertari's influence continued. Her family became deeply connected to the success of the new kingdom. The foundations established during this period would support generations of rulers. Egypt entered an age of confidence. Its monuments became larger. Its influence spread farther. Its culture flourished. And behind much of this success stood individuals whose leadership helped guide the kingdom through periods of transition. Nefertari was one of those individuals. Her story is not remembered because of a single dramatic event. It is remembered because of enduring influence. Because of respect earned over time. Because of a reputation strong enough to survive centuries. The desert winds eventually carried away the voices of her age. The palaces changed. The generations passed. The people who had known her personally disappeared into history. Yet her name remained. Carved into stone. Preserved in memory. Honored by those who came long after she was gone. And while Egypt enjoyed the stability of the early New Kingdom, another queen was quietly growing within the royal family. A woman whose ambition, intelligence, and determination would one day make her one of the most powerful rulers the ancient world had ever known. Her name was Hatshepsut. And her story was approaching. Slowly. Patiently. Like the Nile itself. The Nile flowed peacefully beneath the morning sun. Its waters shimmered with soft reflections of blue sky and drifting clouds. Along the riverbanks, reeds swayed gently in the breeze. Small birds moved among them, searching for food as they had done for countless generations. Egypt was entering one of the brightest periods in its long history. The kingdom was strong. Its rulers were respected. Its temples grew larger each year. Trade connected Egypt to distant lands. The people looked toward the future with confidence. Within this world of growing prosperity, a young princess was born into the royal family. Her name was Hatshepsut. At first, no one could know that she would become one of the most remarkable rulers in all of Egyptian history. She began life as every child begins. Small, curious, observant, surrounded by family, protected by those who cared for her. Yet the world around her was unlike that of most children. She was born into the heart of power itself. Her father was the pharaoh, and from an early age she lived among temples, palaces, ceremonies, and royal traditions that stretched back centuries. Imagine the royal residence where Hatshepsut spent her early years. Wide courtyards opened beneath the warm Egyptian sky. Columns painted in bright colors supported elegant halls. Gardens offered cool spaces filled with trees and flowering plants. Pools reflected sunlight. Servants moved quietly through shaded walkways carrying food, water, and supplies. Musicians occasionally played soft melodies during celebrations. The scent of incense drifted through ceremonial chambers. Every corner of the palace reflected the wealth and stability of the kingdom. For a child, it must have seemed like an endless world of discovery. Hatshepsut grew up watching the machinery of government at work. Officials arrived carrying reports. Priests performed sacred rituals. Messengers brought news from distant regions. Scribes sat patiently recording information on papyrus scrolls. Even as a young girl, she would have seen how leadership functioned. She would have observed how decisions affected the entire kingdom. These experiences shaped her understanding of power long before she ever held it herself. Education was important within the royal family. Princes and princesses learned about religion, administration, traditions, and the responsibilities that came with their status. They listened to stories about earlier rulers. They learned the customs that governed royal life. They became familiar with ceremonies and festivals. Hatshepsut was intelligent and attentive. The knowledge she gained during these years would later prove invaluable. Outside the palace walls, ordinary life continued much as it always had. Farmers worked fertile fields beside the Nile. Women prepared meals and managed households. Craftsmen created pottery, furniture, jewelry, and tools. Merchants traveled between cities carrying goods for trade. Children helped their families and learned practical skills. The rhythm of Egyptian life remained steady. The river provided stability. The seasons followed familiar patterns. The kingdom prospered. As Hatshepsut grew older, she became increasingly involved in religious ceremonies. Religion stood at the center of Egyptian society. The gods were believed to influence every aspect of life. Temples served as spiritual, economic, and administrative centers. Participation in religious rituals was one of the most important duties of the royal family. Among the titles eventually given to Hatshepsut was one of great significance, God's wife of Amun. This position carried prestige and influence. The title connected her closely to one of Egypt's most important religious traditions. Through this role, she gained valuable experience and visibility within the kingdom. Her responsibilities expanded. Her understanding deepened. Gradually, she became more than a princess. She became an important public figure. The city of Thebes, where much of royal life centered, flourished during this period. Its temples dominated the landscape. Massive columns rose toward the sky. Stone statues watched silently over courtyards. Priests moved through sacred spaces carrying offerings. The sound of chanting sometimes echoed beneath painted ceilings. Visitors arriving by boat could see the grandeur of the city long before they reached its shores. For Hatshepsut, these sights were familiar. They formed the backdrop of her daily life. She walked among buildings that inspired awe. She participated in ceremonies that connected the living world to the divine. She learned how symbols, rituals, and traditions helped maintain the authority of the throne. As the years passed, Hatshepsut married her half-brother, who became Pharaoh Thutmose II. Such marriages were common within Egyptian royal families. They reinforced dynastic continuity and strengthened claims to power. Now Hatshepsut held the title of queen. Her position within Egyptian society became even more important. She appeared beside the pharaoh during official ceremonies. Her image was carved into monuments. Her presence symbolized stability and legitimacy. Yet even then, few could have predicted what lay ahead. Most queens supported rulers. Very few became rulers themselves. At this stage, Hatshepsut's future seemed to follow a familiar path. She would serve as queen. She would fulfill religious duties. She would help maintain the traditions of the kingdom. History appeared calm and predictable. But history often changes quietly. The most significant turning points rarely announce themselves. They arrive gradually. Almost unnoticed. Like a shift in the river's current. Like a breeze changing direction. Like clouds gathering far beyond the horizon. Within the royal court, life continued. Festivals filled the calendar. Construction projects advanced. Officials managed the affairs of state. The kingdom remained prosperous. Yet beneath the surface, circumstances were beginning to change. The reign of Thutmose II would not last long. His death would create uncertainty. A young heir remained. An experienced queen remained. And soon Egypt would face a situation that demanded careful leadership. The years of preparation in Hatshepsut's life were nearly complete. Everything she had learned as a princess. Everything she had observed within temples and palaces. Everything she had experienced as queen. All of it was quietly leading toward a moment that would alter the course of Egyptian history. The Nile continued flowing beneath the stars. The people slept peacefully in villages and cities. Temple lamps glowed softly in the darkness. The kingdom rested, unaware that one of its greatest rulers was preparing to step forward. Not as a queen standing beside a king, but as a ruler in her own right. A woman whose achievements would echo across thousands of years. The story of Hatshepsut was only beginning. And with it, the story of one of the most powerful queens ancient Egypt would ever know. The sun rose slowly over Thebes. Golden light spread across the Nile, touching the surface of the water until it shimmered like polished metal. The city awakened little by little. Priests entered temple courtyards. Bakers prepared fresh loaves for the day ahead. Merchants arranged their goods. Boats drifted along the river carrying people, supplies, and messages. To most Egyptians, it seemed like an ordinary morning. Yet history was quietly turning. The reign of Pharaoh Thutmose II had come to an end. His death left the kingdom facing an important question. Who would guide Egypt now? There was an heir. A young boy named Thutmose III. He carried royal blood and possessed the rightful claim to the throne. But he was still a child. He was too young to govern a vast kingdom stretching hundreds of miles along the Nile. Egypt needed leadership. It needed stability. It needed someone capable of protecting the throne until the young king was ready. That responsibility fell to Hatshepsut. At first, her role seemed straightforward. She would serve as regent. She would govern on behalf of the young ruler. Such arrangements were not entirely unusual. History had seen similar situations before. A trusted adult guided the kingdom while a child matured. Most people likely expected that this period would eventually end. The young king would grow older. Power would pass fully into his hands. The story would continue in familiar fashion. But history had other plans. Hatshepsut was not an ordinary regent. She possessed intelligence, experience, confidence, and a deep understanding of Egyptian government. For years she had participated in royal life. She understood the responsibilities of leadership. She knew the traditions of the court. She knew the expectations of priests, officials, and nobles. Most importantly, she understood how essential stability was to Egypt. The kingdom depended upon order. Without it, prosperity could disappear. As months passed, Hatshepsut's position grew stronger. She appeared at official ceremonies. She supervised government affairs. She worked closely with religious institutions. Her authority became increasingly visible. People throughout Egypt saw her exercising power. The transition happened gradually. Almost so gradually that it must have felt natural to many observers. The Nile offered a useful comparison. No one notices a river changing course in a single moment. The process occurs little by little. Year after year. Current after current. Eventually, the landscape itself begins to look different. Something similar was happening with Hatshepsut. Her authority expanded steadily. The foundations of something remarkable were being laid. Imagine the royal court during this period. Large halls filled with carved columns. Sunlight streaming through open spaces. Officials standing respectfully as important matters were discussed. Scribes recording decisions. Messengers arriving from distant regions. Within this world, Hatshepsut sat at the center of government. She listened. She evaluated. She decided. Her responsibilities touched every part of Egyptian life. Trade. Agriculture. Religion. Construction. Diplomacy. The kingdom functioned because countless people performed countless tasks. Someone had to coordinate those efforts. Someone had to maintain balance. Hatshepsut proved capable of doing exactly that. Meanwhile, life beyond the palace walls continued peacefully. Farmers tended crops nourished by the Nile's fertile waters. Children played beside village homes. Artisans shaped pottery and jewelry. Fishermen cast their nets into the river. The routines of ordinary life remained unchanged. Many people may have cared less about political details than about whether the harvest would be good, whether food would be plentiful, and whether peace would continue. Under Hatshepsut's leadership, stability endured. That mattered greatly. Ancient Egyptians valued continuity. They believed that harmony was one of the highest forms of order. A successful ruler preserved that harmony. Gradually, Hatshepsut took a step that few women in history had ever attempted. She began to assume the full powers of a pharaoh. This was extraordinary. Egypt had known influential queens before. It had known powerful royal women. But Hatshepsut was moving beyond those roles. She was not simply advising a ruler. She was becoming the ruler. Ancient records show that she adopted royal titles traditionally associated with kings. Artists began portraying her in ways usually reserved for pharaohs. Statues depicted her wearing royal regalia. Some images even showed her with the ceremonial false beard associated with kingship. To modern eyes, this may seem unusual. But within Egyptian culture, the role of pharaoh carried deep symbolic meaning. Hatshepsut was not trying to become someone else. She was stepping into an office that had long been defined by tradition. The symbols of kingship helped communicate her authority to the kingdom. What is remarkable is how effectively she accomplished this transition. There is little evidence of widespread unrest. The government continued functioning. The temples continued operating. Construction projects continued moving forward. Trade continued flowing. The kingdom remained stable. This suggests that many influential groups accepted her rule. Priests supported important ceremonies. Officials carried out administrative duties. The machinery of Egypt kept moving. Such acceptance was not automatic. It reflected confidence in her leadership. Evenings in Thebes remained beautiful. As the sun lowered toward the western desert, shadows lengthened across temple walls. The sky filled with warm colors. Boats returned to shore. Families gathered for meals. The air cooled. Stars appeared overhead. The same stars that had watched over countless generations. Perhaps during some of these evenings, Hatshepsut reflected upon the unusual path her life had taken. As a child, she had grown up within the royal family. As a young woman, she had become queen. Now she stood on the threshold of something far greater. The responsibilities before her were immense. Yet she seemed ready for them. The years ahead would bring extraordinary achievements. Monuments would rise. Trade expeditions would travel to distant lands. Temples would be expanded and beautified. Egypt would enjoy one of the most prosperous periods in its history. Much of this success would unfold under Hatshepsut's rule. But for now, those accomplishments still belong to the future. The kingdom stood at the beginning of her reign. The river flowed quietly. The people carried on with their daily lives. And a woman unlike any ruler before her was steadily assuming the highest position in the land. Not through sudden conquest. Not through dramatic upheaval. But through patience, experience, competence, and the confidence of a kingdom that increasingly accepted her authority. The age of Hatshepsut had begun. And ancient Egypt was about to witness one of its most remarkable chapters. The Nile flowed quietly beneath the bright Egyptian sky. Its waters moved with the same calm certainty they had shown for thousands of years. Along the banks, life continued in familiar rhythms. Farmers worked fertile fields. Children followed parents through village paths. Merchants loaded boats with grain, cloth, and pottery. The sounds of daily life rose gently into the warm air. Egypt was at peace. The kingdom was stable. And at the center of that stability stood Hatshepsut. What had begun as a temporary responsibility was becoming something much greater. Year by year, her authority expanded. Her position strengthened. Her confidence grew. The people saw her leading the kingdom. Officials saw her making decisions. Priests saw her participating in sacred ceremonies. The reality of power was already in her hands. Now the symbols of power would follow. Hatshepsut formally declared herself pharaoh. It was a remarkable moment in Egyptian history. For centuries, kings had ruled Egypt. Their images covered temple walls. Their statues filled sacred spaces. Their names echoed through official records. Now a woman was stepping into that ancient tradition. Not merely as a queen. Not merely as a regent. But as pharaoh. The ruler of Egypt. The decision required careful thought. Egyptian society valued continuity. People respected tradition. Any major change had to appear consistent with the kingdom's understanding of order and legitimacy. Hatshepsut understood this very well. She did not reject Egyptian traditions. Instead, she worked within them. She presented her rule as part of the natural and divine order of Egypt. Temple inscriptions emphasized her connection to the gods. Religious narratives supported her authority. Public ceremonies reinforced her position. The transition was managed with extraordinary skill. Imagine a festival day in Thebes during her reign. Crowds gather along ceremonial routes. Priests prepare sacred objects. Musicians tune their instruments. The air carries the scent of incense. Colorful banners move gently in the breeze. People wait patiently to witness the procession. Then the ruler appears. Gold gleams in the sunlight. Royal symbols catch the eye. The crowd sees not simply Hatshepsut the queen. They see Hatshepsut the pharaoh. The image is powerful. The message is clear. Egypt has a ruler. Egypt remains stable. The gods continue to watch over the land. For many people, that reassurance mattered deeply. Stability was precious. The memory of earlier periods of division and uncertainty still lingered in Egyptian history. A strong government brought security. It allowed trade to flourish. It supported agriculture. It protected temples. It maintained harmony throughout the kingdom. Hatshepsut's reign provided exactly that. One of the most fascinating aspects of her rule was the way artists portrayed her. Some statues showed her wearing clothing associated with kings. Others included the ceremonial beard worn by pharaohs. To modern observers, these images can seem surprising. Yet they reveal something important. Hatshepsut understood the symbolic language of Egyptian power. The office of pharaoh carried specific expectations. Its visual symbols helped communicate authority. By adopting these symbols, she strengthened her position. At the same time, many inscriptions continued to acknowledge her identity as a woman. Rather than erasing who she was, Egyptian artists and officials adapted traditional imagery to support an unprecedented ruler. The result was unique. A blend of continuity and innovation. As Hatshepsut's reign continued, the kingdom prospered. Construction projects expanded across Egypt. Workers shaped stone beneath the sun. Architects planned ambitious buildings. Artists decorated walls with scenes of religious ceremonies, royal achievements, and daily life. The sound of hammers striking stone echoed through temple complexes. Dust rose into the air as monuments slowly took shape. Every project reflected confidence in the future. Large-scale construction required resources, organization, and stability. Hatshepsut's government provided all three. Meanwhile, ordinary Egyptians continued their daily routines. In villages along the Nile, women ground grain into flour. Bread baked in clay ovens. Children carried water jars. Farmers monitored irrigation channels. Fishermen repaired nets. Life remained connected to the rhythms of nature. The river still determined much of the kingdom's prosperity. Each annual flood brought nourishment to the land. Each harvest provided food for families and communities. The success of the kingdom depended upon these cycles. A wise ruler protected and supported them. Hatshepsut understood this responsibility. The royal court remained a busy center of activity. Messengers traveled between cities. Officials managed taxes and resources. Priests supervised temple affairs. Foreign visitors sometimes arrived bearing gifts and messages from distant lands. The palace served as both home and government headquarters. Its halls witnessed countless discussions. Its courtyards hosted ceremonies. Its gardens provided moments of quiet reflection. Within this environment, Hatshepsut demonstrated remarkable political skill. She surrounded herself with capable advisors. Among them was an official named Senenmut. His rise within the administration reflects the effectiveness of Hatshepsut's government. Talented individuals received opportunities to contribute. Major projects moved forward successfully. The kingdom benefited from competent leadership. As evening settled over Thebes, the city transformed. The intense sunlight softened. Temple walls glowed warmly. The western desert turned shades of gold and bronze. Birds settled among trees. Boats drifted toward shore. Families gathered together for meals. The pace of life slowed. The stars emerged one by one. The same stars that had guided travelers and inspired priests for countless generations. Under those stars, Egypt enjoyed peace. And peace itself is often one of history's greatest achievements. Battles attract attention. Conflicts fill chronicles. Yet long periods of stability allow societies to flourish. They allow art to develop. They allow trade to expand. They allow ordinary people to build better lives. Much of Hatshepsut's greatness rests upon this foundation. She governed during a period of prosperity. She maintained order. She encouraged growth. She demonstrated that effective leadership could take many forms. The years ahead would bring some of her most famous accomplishments. Expeditions would travel across great distances. Magnificent temples would rise from the earth. Her legacy would become visible in stone. But those achievements were still unfolding. For now, the kingdom rested securely beneath her rule. The Nile continued flowing. The temples continued shining beneath the sun. The people continued living their lives. And Hatshepsut, once a princess beside the river, now sat upon the throne of Egypt as one of the most powerful rulers the ancient world had ever known. The years passed gently across the land of Egypt. The Nile continued its endless journey from south to north. Each season arrived in its proper time. The waters rose. The fields turned green. Harvests filled storage houses. Life followed familiar patterns. Under Hatshepsut's rule, Egypt entered a period of remarkable calm and prosperity. There were no constant wars draining the kingdom's strength. There was no widespread unrest disrupting daily life. Instead, attention turned toward building, trade, religion, and growth. The kingdom seemed to breathe easily. And in that atmosphere of stability, some of the greatest achievements of Hatshepsut's reign began to appear. The city of Thebes flourished. Its temples expanded. Its streets remained busy with merchants and craftsmen. Boats crowded the riverbanks. Priests carried out ceremonies in vast sacred complexes. The city stood as one of the most important places in the ancient world. Visitors arriving from distant lands would have been impressed by what they saw. Great columns rose toward the sky. Walls covered with colorful paintings reflected sunlight. Massive statues watched over temple entrances. The scale of these projects communicated power and confidence. Yet behind every monument stood thousands of workers. Stonecutters, builders, artists, scribes, laborers, architects. The achievements of Egypt belonged not only to rulers but also to the countless people whose hands shaped the kingdom. Hatshepsut understood the importance of such projects. Monuments served many purposes. They honored the gods. They celebrated the ruler. They provided work. They strengthened the kingdom's identity. One building in particular would become closely associated with her name. It was a temple unlike any that had come before. A structure so beautiful and elegant that even today visitors stand in quiet admiration when they see it. This was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. Imagine approaching the site during Hatshepsut's lifetime. The western cliffs rise dramatically from the desert floor. Their pale stone glows beneath the Egyptian sun. Against these cliffs stands a magnificent temple. Wide terraces stretch outward. Long ramps connect different levels. Rows of columns create graceful lines and shadows. The building seems almost part of the landscape itself. It does not fight against the mountain behind it. Instead, it appears to emerge naturally from it. The design is calm, balanced, orderly, beautiful. The temple reflected the ideals of Hatshepsut's reign. Harmony, stability, confidence. Visitors walking through its colonnades would have seen carvings telling stories of the queen's achievements. Artists worked carefully to create these scenes. Each figure was carved with attention and skill. Each inscription carried meaning. The walls became a form of memory, a way of preserving history in stone. The construction of such a monument required enormous planning. Stone had to be quarried. Materials had to be transported. Workers had to be organized. Food had to be supplied. Schedules had to be maintained. The successful completion of projects like this demonstrated the strength of Egypt's administration. Everything had to function smoothly. And under Hatshepsut's leadership, it did. Yet her achievements were not limited to architecture. One of the most famous events of her reign involved a trading expedition to a distant land known as Punt. To ancient Egyptians, Punt was a place of great value. It was associated with rare goods and exotic products. The journey required careful preparation. Ships had to be built. Supplies had to be gathered. Crews had to be selected. Navigators had to plan the route. For many people involved, it must have felt like an extraordinary adventure. The ships departed Egypt and traveled far from home. When they returned, they brought valuable cargo. Incense trees, precious materials, exotic animals, rare goods. The success of the expedition became one of the celebrated achievements of Hatshepsut's reign. Scenes depicting the journey were carved into the walls of her temple. Even today, those carvings allow us to glimpse a remarkable chapter of ancient history. For ordinary Egyptians, however, daily life remained rooted in simpler experiences. A farmer in a village beside the Nile may never have seen the distant land of Punt. A potter shaping clay vessels may never have visited Thebes. Yet they benefited from the stability that successful leadership provided. Trade strengthened the economy. Construction projects created opportunities. Peace allowed communities to prosper. These effects reached far beyond the royal court. Morning after morning, people rose with the sun. Children helped families with chores. Women prepared meals. Men worked fields and workshops. Boats carried goods along the river. The familiar rhythm continued. The greatness of Egypt rested upon these countless ordinary lives. As the years passed, Hatshepsut's confidence as ruler became increasingly visible. Her monuments grew more ambitious. Her inscriptions emphasized legitimacy and divine support. Her government functioned effectively. The kingdom remained secure. Many rulers throughout history gained power. Far fewer used that power to create long periods of peace and prosperity. This is one reason Hatshepsut remains so remarkable. She demonstrated that strength could express itself through construction rather than conquest. Through growth rather than conflict. Through stability rather than fear. As evening settled over Deir el-Bahari, shadows stretched across the terraces of her magnificent temple. The cliffs behind it glowed softly in the fading light. The desert became quiet. Birds returned to sheltered places. Workers finished their tasks and headed home. The stars slowly appeared overhead. The temple stood silently beneath the night sky. A monument to vision. A monument to confidence. A monument to a queen who had become pharaoh. The years of her reign continued flowing forward like the Nile itself. Calm. Steady. Purposeful. And while Egypt prospered beneath her rule, her fame spread across the kingdom. People spoke her name. Officials recorded her achievements. Artists carved her image. Her legacy grew stronger with each passing season. The story of Hatshepsut was reaching its highest point. And the wonders of her reign were far from finished. The Nile shimmered beneath the morning sun. Its waters reflected a sky so clear that it seemed almost endless. Along the riverbanks, Egypt awakened to another peaceful day. Farmers walked toward their fields. Fishermen prepared their nets. Merchants loaded boats with goods destined for towns and cities farther downstream. The kingdom was thriving. Under Hatshepsut's rule, Egypt enjoyed stability and prosperity. Temples expanded. Trade flourished. Monumental buildings rose from the earth. Yet one achievement stood apart from many others. It was not a temple. It was not a palace. It was not a statue carved from stone. It was a journey. A journey across great distances to a mysterious land known as Punt. For the people of ancient Egypt, Punt held a special place in the imagination. It was famous for valuable resources and rare products. Stories about it had circulated for generations. Its exact location remains a subject of discussion even today, but to the Egyptians it was a real and important trading partner. The land seemed distant and exotic. A place connected with wealth, beauty, and sacred offerings. Hatshepsut understood the value of trade. Military victories could bring glory, but peaceful exchange could bring prosperity. The resources obtained through trade strengthened the kingdom. They enriched temples. They supported religious ceremonies. They demonstrated Egypt's reach and influence. So preparations began. The expedition required careful planning. Ships had to be built and equipped. Supplies had to be gathered. Crews had to be selected. Officials organized the effort with great attention. Every detail mattered. Ancient travel was never simple. Distances were vast. Conditions could be difficult. Success depended upon preparation and skill. Imagine the harbor during those busy days. Workers carry bundles of supplies. Sailors inspect ropes and wooden beams. Officials review lists and records. The air is filled with activity. Yet beneath the movement lies a sense of anticipation. Everyone understands that something important is about to happen. The ships stand ready. Their sails wait for favorable winds. The crews prepare for a voyage unlike their ordinary journeys along the Nile. Eventually the expedition departs. The vessels leave familiar waters behind. They travel toward distant lands. Days pass. Then weeks. The sea stretches toward the horizon. The shoreline changes. The landscapes become unfamiliar. For many aboard the ships, these sights must have felt extraordinary. Most people in ancient Egypt spent their lives close to home. Traveling such distances exposed sailors to entirely new experiences. New coastlines. New plants. New animals. New people. When the expedition finally reached Punt, the visitors encountered a world both different and fascinating. Ancient carvings created during Hatshepsut's reign provide valuable glimpses of what the Egyptians saw there. These scenes remain among the most famous artistic records from her temple. They depict local rulers, unique buildings, foreign landscapes, exotic goods, The artists took care to record details that would have seemed remarkable to Egyptian viewers. Trade discussions took place. Gifts were exchanged. Relationships were strengthened. The expedition gathered valuable cargo. Among the most treasured items were incense trees. These trees held special significance. Incense played an important role in Egyptian religious ceremonies. The fragrant smoke rising from temple offerings was considered pleasing to the gods. Obtaining living incense trees represented a particularly impressive achievement. The Egyptians carefully transported them home. Along with these trees came many other valuable goods. Rare woods, animal products, precious materials, exotic treasures that could not easily be found within Egypt itself. The ships gradually filled with cargo. The mission had succeeded. When the expedition finally returned, it brought more than physical goods. It brought prestige. It demonstrated the effectiveness of Hatshepsut's leadership. It showed that Egypt possessed the organization and resources necessary to conduct ambitious projects far beyond its borders. News of the successful journey spread throughout the kingdom. Officials celebrated. Temples received offerings. Records were created. Artists began preparing scenes that would preserve the event for future generations. At Deir el-Bahri, Hatshepsut ordered the expedition to be carved into the walls of her magnificent temple. Stonecutters worked carefully. Artists added details. Scribes recorded descriptions. Together they created a lasting record of one of the most famous trading missions in ancient history. Visitors walking through the temple could see the story unfold before their eyes. Ships crossing waters. Foreign landscapes. Rare goods. Incense trees. The achievements of the expedition became part of Hatshepsut's legacy. For ordinary Egyptians, the arrival of these treasures may have seemed almost magical. Most would never travel to distant lands. Most would never see Punt with their own eyes. Yet through trade, the wider world reached Egypt. Exotic products appeared in markets, temples, and workshops. The kingdom felt connected to places beyond the horizon. This connection expanded possibilities. It enriched culture. It strengthened the economy. As evening settled across Thebes, the newly arrived treasures might have rested in storage areas awaiting distribution. Officials recorded inventories. Priests prepared sacred offerings. Workers unloaded cargo. The city buzzed with quiet excitement. Meanwhile, the Nile flowed calmly beneath the stars. The river cared little about human achievements. It continued its ancient journey as it always had. Yet for those living during Hatshepsut's reign, the successful expedition to Punt represented something important. It symbolized confidence. It symbolized prosperity. It symbolized a ruler capable of accomplishing extraordinary things without relying solely on warfare. The story spread through temples and government offices. It was discussed among officials. It was admired by visitors. It became part of the memory of an age that many later generations would view with respect. Years continued to pass. The terraces of Deir el-Bahri grew more beautiful. The kingdom remained stable. Trade flourished. The Queen Pharaoh's reputation grew stronger. And across Egypt, from the great temples of Thebes to the smallest villages beside the Nile, people lived beneath a period of peace that allowed the kingdom to reach new heights. The golden age of Hatshepsut continued. Quietly. Gracefully. Like sunlight moving across the river at dawn. The sun rose over Thebes once again. Its first light touched the eastern bank of the Nile before slowly spreading across the river. The water gleamed softly. Palm trees cast long shadows. Birds moved through the cool morning air. Across the western side of the river, where the desert hills stood silent and ancient, one of the most remarkable buildings in Egypt continued to take shape. It was Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahri. Even today, thousands of years later, it remains one of the most beautiful structures ever built in ancient Egypt. During Hatshepsut's lifetime, it was something even more extraordinary. It was new. Its pale stone shone brightly beneath the sun. Its terraces stretched outward in graceful layers. Its long colonnades created patterns of light and shadow. Visitors approaching the temple must have felt a sense of awe. The building seemed perfectly at home beneath the towering cliffs behind it. Rather than competing with the landscape, it worked together with it. The mountain and the temple appeared connected. Stone meeting stone. Human skill blending with nature. The design reflected balance and harmony, qualities that Egyptians admired deeply. Each morning, workers arrived before the heat of the day became intense. Stonecutters shaped blocks with careful precision. Artists carved scenes into walls. Painters added color to reliefs. Architects supervised construction. The temple did not emerge all at once. It grew gradually. Day after day. Month after month. Year after year. Thousands of hands contributed to its creation. Every column. Every wall. Every carving. Every detail required patience and skill. The sounds of construction echoed softly through the desert air. The tapping of tools. The movement of stone. The voices of workers coordinating their efforts. These sounds became part of the landscape. Meanwhile, the cliffs above watched silently. They had stood there long before Hatshepsut was born. They would remain long after her lifetime had passed into history. Yet for a brief moment, they became the backdrop for one of Egypt's greatest architectural achievements. The temple was more than a monument. It was a statement. It reflected Hatshepsut's vision of rulership. Its elegance communicated confidence. Its scale communicated power. Its beauty communicated order. Visitors walking through the temple encountered stories carved into stone. These carvings served many purposes. They honored the gods. They celebrated achievements. They preserved memories. They communicated messages to future generations. One section depicted the famous expedition to Punt. Visitors could follow the journey through detailed scenes. Ships crossed distant waters. Foreign lands appeared. Rare goods were transported back to Egypt. The carvings transformed history into something visible. Something permanent. Elsewhere within the temple, scenes emphasized Hatshepsut's connection to the divine world. Religion remained central to Egyptian life. The ruler was expected to maintain harmony between humanity and the gods. Temple art reinforced this sacred responsibility. Every image carried meaning. Every inscription contributed to a larger story. The temple became a place where politics, religion, and art met together. As construction continued, life throughout Egypt remained peaceful. The Nile delivered fertile soil. Farmers harvested grain. Markets remained busy. Trade routes carried valuable goods. The kingdom prospered. For ordinary people, the great temple may have seemed distant from everyday concerns. Yet projects like this influenced many lives. Construction created work. Temples supported local economies. Craftsmen gained opportunities to develop their skills. Large monuments required vast networks of labor and resources. Their impact spread far beyond the building itself. Imagine a young stone worker arriving at Deir el-Bahri before sunrise. He walks through cool desert air. The cliffs glow faintly in the first light of dawn. Other workers gather nearby. Tools are prepared. Instructions are given. Soon the day's labor begins. Hour by hour, another small piece of the temple moves closer to completion. He may never meet the pharaoh personally. Yet his work becomes part of her legacy. Thousands of similar stories unfolded during the construction of Egypt's great monuments. The achievements of rulers rested upon the efforts of countless individuals. As the years passed, the temple became increasingly magnificent. Columns lined broad terraces. Statues stood proudly. Painted reliefs covered walls. Gardens may have softened parts of the landscape with greenery. Visitors arriving by boat across the Nile could see the structure from a distance. Against the pale cliffs, it must have looked extraordinary. A place of beauty emerging from the desert itself. Hatshepsut's reputation grew alongside the temple. Her reign continued bringing stability and prosperity. Government administration functioned smoothly. Religious institutions remained strong. Trade flourished. Construction projects advanced. The kingdom enjoyed one of the most successful periods in its history. Yet time never stands still. Even during peaceful years, change continues quietly. Children become adults. New generations appear. Old generations fade away. The seasons turn. The river flows. The stars cross the night sky. And eventually, every ruler must face the passage of time. As Hatshepsut grew older, the achievements of her reign surrounded her. Temples stood where empty spaces had once existed. Trade networks connected Egypt to distant lands. The kingdom remained prosperous. Her legacy was already taking shape. But the future remained uncertain. History often remembers rulers for what they build. Yet history can also be unpredictable. Monuments may survive. Memories may fade. Records may be altered. The years ahead would bring new challenges. New rulers would emerge. And the story of Hatshepsut's legacy would take unexpected turns. For now, however, the temple beneath the cliffs stood proudly beneath the Egyptian sun. A symbol of peace. A symbol of prosperity. A symbol of one of the most powerful queens ever to rule ancient Egypt. The wind moved gently across the terraces. The shadows shifted slowly throughout the day. And the great monument continued watching over the Nile, just as it would for thousands of years to come. The Nile flowed steadily through Egypt. Morning followed morning. Season followed season. The river rose and fell according to rhythms that seemed older than memory itself. Along its banks, life continued in familiar ways. Farmers planted and harvested. Fishermen worked the water. Merchants traveled between cities. Children grew up listening to stories told beneath evening skies. During these years, Hatshepsut remained firmly upon the throne. Her reign had entered a mature and peaceful stage. The excitement of transition was long behind her. The great projects she had begun were flourishing. The kingdom was stable. The government functioned smoothly. The temples were active. Trade continued to bring wealth into Egypt. There is something quietly remarkable about long periods of peace. History books often focus on wars and dramatic events. Yet peaceful years shape the lives of ordinary people just as profoundly. A good harvest matters. Safe roads matter. Stable communities matter. The ability to plan for the future matters. Under Hatshepsut, many Egyptians experienced exactly those kinds of conditions. The kingdom felt secure. Imagine a village beside the Nile during these years. The sun rises over fields rich with crops. Workers head out to tend irrigation channels. Women prepare bread from freshly milled grain. Children help with simple chores before finding moments to play. The scent of baking bread drifts through the air. Birds move among the reeds. The river glitters nearby. For most people, these daily routines mattered far more than distant political decisions. Yet those routines depended upon stability. And stability depended upon effective leadership. Hatshepsut's success can be seen in these ordinary moments. A peaceful village. A thriving market. A successful harvest. These are often the true signs of a prosperous kingdom. Far away in Thebes, the great temples remained busy. Priests performed rituals each day. Offerings were presented to the gods. Incense drifted through sacred halls. The sound of chanting echoed beneath painted ceilings. Temple life followed ancient traditions that connected generations together. Religion remained woven into every part of Egyptian society. People looked to the gods for guidance, protection, and meaning. The ruler played an important role within this spiritual world. Hatshepsut continued supporting religious institutions throughout her reign. Her building projects honored the gods. Her ceremonies reinforced sacred traditions. Her authority was closely connected to the belief that Egypt existed within a divine order. Visitors arriving in Thebes during these years would have encountered a city filled with confidence. Construction projects stood completed or nearing completion. Markets offered goods from distant lands. Officials carried out administrative duties. The riverbank remained crowded with boats. The city reflected the prosperity of the kingdom itself. The magnificent temple at Deir el-Bahri had become one of the jewels of Egypt. Its terraces gleamed in the sunlight. Its carvings preserved stories for future generations. Its graceful design impressed visitors. The monument stood as a visible reminder of Hatshepsut's accomplishments. Meanwhile, the young Thutmose III continued growing older. For many years, he had existed alongside Hatshepsut's rule. Although she held power, he remained an important member of the royal family. Time moved steadily forward. The child who once required guardianship gradually became a man. This reality lingered quietly in the background of Egyptian politics. For the moment, however, the arrangement remained stable. There is no clear evidence of constant conflict between them during much of Hatshepsut's reign. The kingdom continued functioning effectively. Projects continued. Administration continued. Life continued. As evening settled across Egypt, daily activity slowed. The heat of the day faded. Families gathered together. Meals were shared. Stories were told. Oil lamps glowed softly within homes. The stars appeared above the desert. These peaceful evenings connected people across social classes. Whether living in a palace or a simple village house, everyone experienced the transition from day to night. Everyone watched the same sky. Everyone listened to the same river. Even rulers could not escape the passage of time. Years accumulated. Children became adults. Parents became grandparents. Friends and advisors aged. New faces appeared within the court. Old faces disappeared. This steady movement of life surrounded Hatshepsut just as it surrounded every other person in Egypt. The achievements of her reign grew larger with each passing year. Her monuments stood strong. Her trade networks succeeded. Her government remained stable. Few rulers in history have enjoyed such a sustained period of prosperity. Yet all reigns eventually reach their final chapter. No matter how successful, no matter how powerful, no matter how beloved, the day eventually arrives when leadership passes to someone new. For Hatshepsut, that day was slowly approaching. The exact details surrounding her final years remain uncertain. Ancient history often leaves questions unanswered. Records are incomplete. Evidence survives only in fragments. What is clear is that her reign lasted for more than 2 decades. That alone is a significant achievement. Maintaining authority for so long required intelligence, skill, and political strength. As the years drew toward their conclusion, the monuments she had built continued rising above the landscape. The temple at Deir el-Bahri stood beneath the cliffs. The carvings of the Punt expedition remained visible. Statues displayed her image. Inscriptions recorded her accomplishments. The physical evidence of her rule surrounded the kingdom. Future generations would encounter these monuments and remember her name. Or at least, some would. Because the story of Hatshepsut's legacy would soon take an unexpected turn. A turn shaped by memory, by politics, and by the way history itself is sometimes rewritten. For now, though, the kingdom rested peacefully. The Nile flowed beneath the stars. The temples stood silent in the night. And one of Egypt's greatest rulers continued her journey through the final years of an extraordinary reign. The years moved quietly across Egypt. The Nile continued its patient journey through the land. The river did not know which ruler sat upon the throne. It did not care about titles or monuments. It simply flowed, as it always had, carrying life from one generation to the next. Under its watchful presence, Hatshepsut's long reign slowly approached its end. For more than 2 decades, she had governed one of the most powerful kingdoms in the ancient world. She had overseen great building projects. She had strengthened trade. She had maintained stability. She had done something almost no woman before her had accomplished. She had ruled as pharaoh. Yet even the most successful reign cannot last forever. The exact details of Hatshepsut's final years remain hidden behind the veil of time. Ancient records do not tell the complete story. The people who knew her personally disappeared thousands of years ago. Their conversations were never written down. Their private thoughts were never preserved. Only fragments remain. Stone inscriptions, statues, temple carvings, scattered clues left behind by history. Somewhere within those final years, Hatshepsut grew older. Like every person who has ever lived, she experienced the passage of time. The young princess who once walked through palace gardens had become an experienced ruler. The queen who had stepped cautiously toward power had become a confident pharaoh. Now the seasons continued passing. The sun rose and set. The stars crossed the sky. And the final chapter of her life approached. Imagine an evening at Deir el-Bahri during those years. The cliffs glow softly in the fading sunlight. Long shadows stretch across the terraces. The desert becomes quiet. A cool breeze moves through the colonnades. The temple stands complete. Its walls tell stories of achievement. Its statues watch silently over the landscape. Everything Hatshepsut worked to create surrounds her. The evidence of her reign stands in stone. The future, however, remains uncertain. Eventually, Hatshepsut disappeared from the stage of history. Her death likely occurred sometime around the middle of the 15th century BCE. The exact circumstances are unknown. Ancient Egypt did not leave us a detailed account. What remains clear is that her reign came to an end. And when it did, power passed fully into the hands of Thutmose III. The young boy who had once shared the royal stage was now a grown man. His own reign would become one of the most successful military periods in Egyptian history. Yet the relationship between his legacy and Hatshepsut's legacy would prove complicated. At first, the transition appears to have been relatively smooth. Egypt remained stable. The government continued functioning. Temples remained active. Trade continued. Life along the Nile followed its familiar rhythms. Farmers still worked the fields. Fishermen still cast their nets. Merchants still traveled between cities. The ordinary people of Egypt likely cared more about the harvest than about palace politics. Their daily lives continued. Years passed. Then something unusual began to happen. In certain places, Hatshepsut's images started disappearing. Some statues were damaged. Some inscriptions were altered. Some representations of her rule were removed. For a long time, historians debated why this occurred. The answer remains uncertain even today. Perhaps political reasons played a role. Perhaps later rulers wanted to emphasize traditional male kingship. Perhaps dynastic concerns influenced decisions. History rarely provides simple explanations. What matters is that parts of Hatshepsut's public memory were deliberately altered. Imagine workers arriving at a temple wall many years after her death. Carefully they chip away at an inscription. A name disappears. A face becomes damaged. A figure that once stood proudly in stone is slowly erased. The monument remains. But part of its story changes. Such acts are powerful. They attempt to shape memory itself. To influence what future generations will remember. Yet history often resists complete erasure. Some statues survived. Some inscriptions remained. Some records escaped destruction. The temple at Deir el-Bahri endured. The evidence never vanished entirely. Like footprints preserved in desert sand, traces of Hatshepsut remained waiting to be discovered. For centuries afterward, people forgot much of her story. New rulers came. New dynasties appeared. The ancient temples aged. The kingdom itself changed. Eventually, the civilization that built the pyramids and temples faded into history. Sand drifted across monuments. Cities declined. Knowledge was lost. The names of many rulers disappeared from memory. Hatshepsut became one of them. The woman who had ruled Egypt for decades gradually slipped into obscurity. Thousands of years passed. Empires rose and fell across the world. Languages changed. New religions spread. Generations came and went. The Nile continued flowing. Always flowing. Patiently crossing the centuries. Then, much later, scholars and archaeologists began uncovering ancient Egypt once more. They studied inscriptions. They excavated temples. They examined monuments. Piece by piece, forgotten stories returned. And among those stories was the remarkable life of Hatshepsut. The damaged statues. The altered inscriptions. The surviving carvings. All of these clues slowly revealed the truth. A woman had once ruled Egypt as pharaoh. A woman had overseen one of the kingdom's most prosperous periods. A woman had built monuments that still stood beneath the desert sun. The attempt to diminish her memory had not fully succeeded. History had preserved enough evidence. Today, Hatshepsut is remembered once again. Visitors walk through the terraces of Deir el-Bahri. They admire the elegant architecture. They study the carvings. They learn about the expedition to Punt. They speak her name. The silence that surrounded her story for so many centuries has been broken. Yet there is something peaceful about the way her legacy survived. Not through conquest. Not through battles. Not through fear. But through stone. Through art. Through careful records. Through the quiet endurance of monuments. As the stars appeared above Egypt long ago, the people living beneath them could not know how history would remember their ruler. They could not know that thousands of years later, people from distant lands would still study her life. They could not know that her temple would continue standing. They simply lived their lives beside the Nile. And the river flowed onward, just as it does today. But the story of powerful Egyptian queens was not over. Far from it. Beyond Hatshepsut's reign, other remarkable women waited in the centuries ahead. Women whose names would become famous throughout the ancient world. Women who would shape history in very different ways. And among them was a queen whose beauty, intelligence, and influence would eventually become legendary. Her name was Nefertiti. And her story was beginning to emerge beneath the golden sun of Egypt. The Nile continued its timeless journey. Its waters flowed through Egypt just as they had during the reigns of countless kings and queens before. The river reflected the morning sun. It nourished fields of grain. It carried boats between cities. It remained the steady heartbeat of the kingdom. Generations had passed since the days of Hatshepsut. Children had grown into adults. Adults had become ancestors. New rulers sat upon the throne. New monuments rose from the earth. Yet Egypt remained strong. The kingdom continued to flourish beside its beloved river. And in this changing world, another remarkable woman entered history. Her name was Nefertiti. Few queens of ancient Egypt have inspired as much fascination. Even thousands of years later, her image remains one of the most recognizable from the ancient world. The elegant bust discovered in modern times became famous across the globe. Its graceful features seemed to capture a moment frozen in time. Yet Nefertiti was far more than a beautiful face carved by an artist. She lived during one of the most unusual periods in Egyptian history. A time of great change. A time of new ideas. A time when old traditions were questioned and new paths were explored. To understand Nefertiti, it helps to imagine Egypt during her lifetime. The kingdom was wealthy. Trade connected Egypt with distant regions. Temples controlled enormous resources. Artists produced magnificent works. The royal court enjoyed influence and prestige. Yet beneath this prosperity, important changes were beginning to unfold. Nefertiti became the wife of a prince who would later become Pharaoh Amenhotep IV. In time, this ruler would change his name to Akhenaten. His reign would transform Egypt in ways few people could have anticipated. When Nefertiti first entered royal life, however, the future remained uncertain. She likely grew up surrounded by the customs and traditions of Egyptian society. She would have learned the rituals of the court. She would have become familiar with religious ceremonies. She would have understood the expectations placed upon members of the royal family. As queen, her responsibilities expanded. She appeared beside the king during important occasions. She participated in ceremonies. She represented stability and continuity. Yet unlike many royal women before her, Nefertiti would become unusually visible in public imagery. Artists depicted her frequently. Her presence appears throughout surviving artwork. Again and again, she stands beside the king. Not hidden. Not distant. But active and prominent. This visibility hints at her importance. Imagine the royal court during these years. Wide halls supported by painted columns. Courtyards filled with sunlight. Pools reflecting the sky. Servants moving quietly through shaded walkways. Officials discussing affairs of state. Priests conducting rituals. Musicians performing during celebrations. The atmosphere blends elegance with responsibility. The palace is both a home and a center of government. Within this environment, Nefertiti developed her public role. The people of Egypt were accustomed to seeing queens participate in ceremonies. Yet Nefertiti's prominence often seems greater than usual. Ancient artwork frequently portrays her on a scale similar to the king himself. Such artistic choices were meaningful. Egyptian artists rarely made decisions without purpose. Size often reflected importance. Position often reflected status. The repeated appearance of Nefertiti suggests a queen of considerable influence. Outside the palace walls, ordinary life continued much as it always had. Farmers cultivated fields beside the Nile. Women baked bread and prepared meals. Children learned skills from their families. Merchants traveled along trade routes. Craftsmen worked in workshops creating pottery, furniture, jewelry, and tools. The rhythms of daily life remained familiar. The river still determined much of the kingdom's prosperity. The seasons still guided agricultural work. The stars still crossed the night sky. Most people likely paid little attention to subtle political changes within the royal court. Their concerns were practical. Food, family, work, community. Yet the decisions made by rulers eventually touched everyone. And the decisions that would soon emerge from the court of Akhenaten and Nefertiti were unlike anything Egypt had seen before. Religion stood at the center of Egyptian society. For centuries, Egyptians worshipped many gods. Temples honored different deities. Priests managed vast religious institutions. Ancient traditions connected communities across the kingdom. These beliefs shaped daily life. They shaped festivals. They shaped government. They shaped the understanding of the universe itself. Then change began. Gradually at first. Then more dramatically. Akhenaten developed a strong devotion to a solar deity known as Aten. The Aten was associated with the sun's life-giving power. Over time, this devotion grew increasingly important. Religious emphasis shifted. Old traditions began losing influence. New ideas gained prominence. Nefertiti stood beside the king during this transformation. Ancient artwork frequently depicts the royal family worshipping beneath the rays of the Aten. The sun extends downward toward them. Its rays end in tiny hands offering blessings. The imagery feels different from earlier Egyptian art. More personal. More intimate. More focused on family. Again and again, Nefertiti appears at the center of these scenes. She is not merely observing. She is participating. Her role remains visible and significant. As the years passed, a new city was established. Today it is known as Amarna. It became the center of Akhenaten's religious and political vision. The royal court relocated there. Artists developed distinctive styles. Architects created new buildings. The city represented a fresh beginning. Imagine arriving at Amarna during its height. Bright sunlight reflects from newly constructed buildings. Wide streets stretch through the city. Temples stand open to the sky. Workers move through busy neighborhoods. Officials carry messages. Priests perform ceremonies. Everything feels new. Different. Unusual. Nefertiti lived at the heart of this experiment. Her image appeared throughout the city. Her influence remained visible. Her story became intertwined with one of the most fascinating chapters in Egyptian history. Yet many mysteries remain. Ancient records become less clear as time passes. Questions emerge. What exactly was her role? How much influence did she exercise? What happened during her later years? Historians continue searching for answers. The evidence survives only in fragments. like pieces of a puzzle scattered across centuries. For now, Nefertiti stands within a world undergoing transformation. A queen beside a king who sought to reshape Egypt's religious landscape. A woman whose image would survive for thousands of years. A figure both familiar and mysterious. And as the sun rose over the city of Amarna, casting long rays across temples and palaces, the most intriguing chapters of her story were still waiting to unfold. Morning came softly to Amarna. The first rays of sunlight spread across the desert landscape, touching rooftops, courtyards, and temple walls. The city awakened beneath the vast blue sky. Workers began their daily tasks. Officials moved through administrative buildings. Priests prepared for ceremonies dedicated to the Aten. Unlike many older Egyptian cities, Amarna felt new. It had not grown gradually over centuries. It had been planned, created, built to serve a vision. For Akhenaten and Nefertiti, it represented something more than a capital city. It represented a different future. The city stretched along the eastern bank of the Nile. Behind it rose desert cliffs glowing softly in the morning light. Before it flowed the river itself, carrying life through the heart of Egypt. The location was beautiful, open, filled with sunlight. The atmosphere reflected the religious focus of the age. The Aten, represented by the sun's life-giving power, stood at the center of royal belief. And everywhere in the city, sunlight seemed to play a special role. Temples were designed differently from many earlier Egyptian temples. Traditional temples often led visitors into increasingly dark and sacred spaces. Amarna's temples emphasized openness. Large courtyards welcomed the sun. The sky itself became part of the architecture. Imagine standing within one of these sacred spaces. Bright sunlight fills the area. The desert air is warm. Stone surfaces reflect light. Priests move quietly through ceremonial duties. Offerings are presented. The atmosphere feels calm and expansive. Nefertiti frequently appeared in scenes connected to these religious ceremonies. Artists carved her image again and again. She stands beside Akhenaten. She participates in rituals. She receives blessings from the Aten's rays. Her importance remains unmistakable. For many historians, this visibility suggests a queen whose influence reached far beyond ordinary expectations. The royal family occupied a unique place within the city's life. Artwork from Amarna often shows scenes that feel surprisingly personal. The king and queen appear with their daughters. They share moments together. They sit beneath the rays of the Aten. They interact as a family. Such depictions differ from much earlier royal art. They create a sense of closeness, a sense of humanity. Visitors walking through palaces and temples would have encountered these images frequently. The royal family became a central symbol of the new religious order. Life within the palace remained busy. Servants carried supplies through corridors. Officials attended meetings. Scribes recorded information on papyrus. Messengers arrived from different regions of Egypt. The kingdom still required administration. Taxes still needed collection. Resources still required management. The daily work of government continued. Even during periods of religious change, practical responsibilities remained essential. Nefertiti lived within this world of ceremony and administration. Her days likely blended public duties with private family life. She participated in festivals. She appeared during official events. She helped maintain the image of royal authority. At the same time, she was a mother raising several daughters within the royal household. These two worlds existed side by side. The public and the private. The ceremonial and the personal. Outside the city, ordinary Egyptians continued living according to familiar rhythms. Farmers cultivated fields along the Nile. Women baked bread and brewed beer. Children learned trades from parents and relatives. Fishermen worked the river. Merchants traveled trade routes. For many people, daily survival mattered more than royal theology. The sun still rose each morning. The river still nourished the land. Life continued. Yet changes at the highest levels of society gradually influenced everyone. The rise of Aten worship altered relationships between the crown and traditional religious institutions. Older temples lost some influence. New priorities emerged. Resources shifted. The kingdom entered a period unlike any it had experienced before. At the center of these developments stood Akhenaten and Nefertiti. As years passed, Nefertiti's prominence remained striking. Some scholars have suggested that her authority may have grown significantly during the later years of the reign. The evidence is incomplete. Ancient history often leaves room for uncertainty. Records disappear. Monuments become damaged. Names fade from stone. Yet enough evidence survives to show that she occupied an exceptional position. Few queens appear so frequently and so prominently in surviving artwork. Few queens leave such a strong visual impression. As evening approached, Amarna became quieter. The intense heat softened. Long shadows stretched across streets and courtyards. The cliffs beyond the city glowed golden beneath the setting sun. Families gathered together. Meals were shared. The sounds of daily activity gradually faded. Above the city, the sky deepened from gold to purple and finally to black. Stars appeared one by one. The same stars that had watched over Egypt for thousands of years. The same stars that watched over kings, queens, farmers, merchants, and children alike. Within the royal residence, lamps flickered softly. Conversations continued. Plans were discussed. Life moved forward. Yet beneath the calm surface of Amarna, uncertainty lingered. The changes introduced by Akhenaten and Nefertiti were dramatic. Not everyone may have welcomed them. Traditional beliefs remained deeply rooted throughout Egypt. The future of the new religious order was far from guaranteed. History often appears stable while it is changing. A city can seem permanent even when its greatest days are already passing. A ruler can appear powerful even while unseen challenges grow. Amarna shone brightly beneath the sun. Its temples stood proud. Its streets remained active. Its rulers commanded attention. But the years ahead would bring mysteries, questions, and eventual transformation. The city of sunlight still flourished. Nefertiti still stood beside the king. The Aten still dominated religious life. Yet time continued moving forward. And time, as always, would eventually reshape everything. The years drifted across Amarna like gentle desert winds. Morning followed morning. The sun rose above the eastern horizon and spread its light across temples, homes, and palace walls. The rays of the Aten touched the city that Akhenaten and Nefertiti had built together. For a time, everything seemed firmly established. The city flourished. The royal family appeared constantly in artwork. Religious ceremonies continued. Government officials carried out their duties. The experiment at Amarna appeared strong. Yet history often becomes more mysterious the closer we look. And few queens in ancient Egypt are surrounded by more mystery than Nefertiti. For many years, she stood prominently beside Akhenaten. Her image appeared throughout the city. Artists depicted her participating in religious ceremonies. She seemed inseparable from the story of the reign. Then, gradually, the evidence becomes less clear. The records grow quieter. The clues become fewer. The certainty begins to fade. Historians have spent generations trying to understand exactly what happened. The surviving evidence leaves room for many possibilities. Some scholars believe Nefertiti remained influential throughout the later years of Akhenaten's reign. Others suggest that her role changed over time. Still others propose that she may have taken on even greater authority than previously imagined. The truth remains hidden among fragments of ancient history. Imagine a scribe working in Amarna during those years. He sits cross-legged with papyrus before him. His brush moves carefully across the surface. Outside, the city continues its daily life. People walk through streets. Merchants conduct business. Priests perform rituals. The scribe records information that seems important at the time. Yet he cannot know which records will survive thousands of years. He cannot know which documents will disappear forever. History often depends upon chance. A single lost inscription can leave a question unanswered. A damaged wall can erase crucial details. A destroyed building can take its secrets with it. This is one reason Nefertiti remains so fascinating. We know enough to recognize her importance. Yet many details remain uncertain. The mystery invites curiosity. It encourages careful study. And it reminds us how fragile historical memory can be. One possibility that has intrigued scholars is the idea that Nefertiti may have exercised authority very close to that of a ruler. Some evidence suggests she occupied an exceptionally powerful position. Her prominence in official imagery was extraordinary. Her role within religious life was central. She appears again and again beside Akhenaten as an active participant in state affairs. Whether she ever formally ruled remains debated. But her influence is difficult to ignore. As the years passed, the city of Amarna continued shining beneath the Egyptian sun. The wide streets remained busy. The open-air temples welcomed worshippers. The royal family remained at the center of public life. Yet beyond the city, traditional Egypt still existed. Ancient customs remained deeply rooted. Many communities continued following practices that had existed for generations. The old religious traditions had not vanished completely. The memory of older gods remained strong. The great temples of previous centuries were not easily forgotten. The kingdom existed between continuity and change. Between old beliefs and new visions. Nefertiti lived at the heart of that tension. Perhaps she understood better than most how delicate the situation was. Power often appears solid from a distance. Yet those who live within it know how much effort is required to maintain stability. Every decision matters. Every alliance matters. Every symbol matters. As evening settled across Amarna, the city softened beneath fading light. The bright sun that dominated the day's ceremonies slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. Long shadows stretched across courtyards. The desert cooled. Families gathered for meals. The sounds of work gradually faded. Even the most ambitious cities experience quiet evenings. Moments when activity pauses. Moments when people reflect. Moments when the future remains unknown. Within the palace, Nefertiti may have experienced such evenings herself. She may have watched the changing colors of sunset. She may have listened to conversations among family members. She may have considered the challenges facing the kingdom. These simple moments connect ancient lives to our own. Across thousands of years, human experiences remain familiar. The passage of time. The uncertainty of tomorrow. The hope for stability. The desire to leave something meaningful behind. Eventually, the reign of Akhenaten approached its end. The religious revolution that had transformed Egypt would not last forever. The city of Amarna itself would face an uncertain future. The world that Nefertiti helped create would begin to change. And as those changes unfolded, her story would become increasingly difficult to trace. She seems to step into shadow. Not disappearing entirely, but becoming harder to see. Like a figure walking into the distance at sunset. Her image remains. Her legacy remains. Her famous likeness survives. Yet many details fade from view. This mystery has become part of her enduring appeal. Unlike some rulers whose lives are recorded in great detail, Nefertiti leaves space for imagination. Space for questions. Space for wonder. Her story reminds us that history is not always complete. Sometimes we encounter silence. Sometimes we find only fragments. Sometimes we must accept uncertainty. And yet even through those fragments, a picture emerges. A queen of remarkable presence. A woman who stood at the center of one of Egypt's most unusual periods. A figure whose influence continues to be felt thousands of years later. As night settled over Amarna, stars appeared above the desert. The city rested beneath the vast sky. Its temples stood silent. Its streets grew quiet. Its rulers looked toward an uncertain future. And somewhere within that future waited the end of an extraordinary chapter in Egyptian history. The city of sunlight would not remain unchanged forever. Neither would the kingdom. But the memory of Nefertiti would endure. Like a distant light. Soft. Mysterious. And impossible to forget. The sun rose over Amarna just as it always had. Golden light spilled across the city. The rays touched temple walls, palace courtyards, workshops, gardens, and homes. For a moment, everything appeared unchanged. Yet beneath the familiar sunlight, Egypt was entering a period of transition. The reign of Akhenaten was drawing to a close. The grand experiment that had transformed religion, politics, and daily life faced an uncertain future. For years, Amarna had stood at the center of a new vision. The city had been built with purpose. Its temples honored the Aten. Its streets reflected the ambitions of the royal court. Its monuments celebrated a different way of understanding the divine. Now that vision would be tested. History often changes quietly. The most important shifts are not always marked by dramatic events. Sometimes they happen gradually. One decision leads to another. One generation replaces the previous one. One set of beliefs slowly gives way to another. The decline of Amarna followed this pattern. As Akhenaten's reign ended, questions emerged. Who would lead Egypt next? What direction would the kingdom take? Would the new religious system survive? Would the city remain the center of power? No one could know for certain. The people living in Amarna continued their daily routines. Workers reported to their jobs. Scribes maintained records. Merchants traded goods. Families prepared meals. Children played in courtyards. Life carried on. Yet uncertainty lingered. It moved quietly through the kingdom like a breeze across the desert. Nefertiti's role during these final years remains one of history's great mysteries. The surviving evidence becomes difficult to interpret. Some clues suggest she may have remained influential. Others leave room for different possibilities. Ancient Egypt often speaks to us through fragments. And fragments rarely tell complete stories. What we do know is that the world she helped build would soon begin to change. After Akhenaten's death, the political landscape shifted rapidly. The younger generation stepped forward. New leaders emerged. Among them was a boy who would become one of the most famous pharaohs in history. His name was Tutankhamun. Later, it would become Tutankhamun. At first, he was very young. Like many rulers before him, he depended upon advisors and experienced officials. The kingdom needed guidance. Decisions needed to be made. And one of the most important decisions involved religion. The changes introduced during the Amarna period had been dramatic. Many traditional institutions had lost influence. Ancient customs had been disrupted. Now the process began to reverse. Gradually, Egypt returned to older religious traditions. The worship of the traditional gods regained prominence. Temples reopened. Priests resumed familiar practices. Ancient rituals returned. The change did not happen overnight. But the direction became clear. The kingdom was moving away from Akhenaten's experiment. And as that happened, Amarna's importance began to fade. Imagine the city during these years. The buildings still stand. The streets remain intact. The temples continue to rise beneath the sky. Yet the energy feels different. The future no longer seems certain. Officials begin leaving. Resources are redirected elsewhere. Attention shifts toward older centers of power. Little by little, the city loses its central role. The process is gradual. A workshop closes. A government office relocates. A family moves away. Then another. Then another. Over time, the population shrinks. The bustling city becomes quieter. The great vision that created Amarna begins to dissolve. History is filled with such places. Cities that once seemed permanent. Capitals that appeared destined to last forever. Yet time changes everything. Amarna was no exception. As years passed, much of the city was abandoned. Buildings fell into disrepair. Walls crumbled. Sand drifted across streets. Nature slowly reclaimed spaces once filled with activity. The desert waited patiently. It always does. The same sun that had illuminated the city's birth now watched its decline. The same stars that shone above royal ceremonies now shone above empty buildings. The transformation happened quietly. Without hurry. Without drama. Simply as part of history's endless cycle. For Nefertiti, the story becomes increasingly difficult to follow. Her fate remains uncertain. Some scholars believe she may have died during the later years of the Amarna period. Others suggest different possibilities. The evidence is incomplete. Her final chapter remains hidden. Yet her influence survives. Her image survived. Her name survived. Her memory endured long after the city itself faded. Today, when people think of Nefertiti, they rarely think first about Amarna's decline. Instead, they remember the elegance of her famous bust. They remember her prominence beside the king. They remember the mystery that surrounds her life. In many ways, her legacy outlasted the city that once celebrated her. As evening settled over the fading streets of Amarna, long shadows stretched across abandoned spaces. The day's heat slowly disappeared. The desert became quiet. Wind moved softly through empty courtyards. The sounds of a once busy capital faded into silence. The city of sunlight was passing into memory. Its grand experiment had ended. Its vision had changed. Its future belonged to the past. Yet Egypt itself continued. The Nile still flowed. The fields still produced harvests. The temples still welcomed worshippers. The kingdom endured. And in that enduring kingdom, a young pharaoh was beginning his own journey. a boy whose tomb would one day become the most famous archaeological discovery in history. A boy king whose story would carry Egypt into another remarkable chapter. The age of Tutankhamun was approaching. And with it came new queens, new mysteries, and new stories waiting beside the eternal river. And so, as the centuries drift softly into the distance, the story of Egypt's powerful queens begins to settle like evening light upon the river. The Nile still flows. It flows past fields and villages, past temples worn smooth by time, past monuments that have watched countless sunrises and sunsets. It moves with the same quiet patience it carried long before the first queen wore a crown, and long after the last royal voice faded into history. Mernioth, Ahotep, Amos Nefertari, Hatshepsut, Nefertiti. Their lives were different, yet they were connected by the same river, the same land, and the same ancient sky. Some guided kingdoms through uncertainty. Some protected dynasties during difficult years. Some built temples of breathtaking beauty. Some helped shape religion, politics, and culture. And some left behind mysteries that still whisper across the centuries. Yet beyond their titles and achievements, they were also human beings. They watched the sun rise over the Nile. They listened to the wind moving through palm trees. They walked through gardens scented with flowers. They shared meals with family. They worried about the future. They hoped for stability. They lived their lives one day at a time, just as countless ordinary Egyptians did beside them. The monuments remain. The statues remain. The carved inscriptions remain. But perhaps the most enduring part of their legacy is something quieter. A reminder that wisdom, patience, resilience, and leadership can leave marks that outlast even stone. As darkness gently settles over ancient Egypt, the great temples become still. The desert cools beneath the stars. The last colors of sunset disappear beyond the western horizon. Boats rest quietly along the riverbanks. The voices of the day grow silent. Above it all, the night sky stretches endlessly across the land. The same stars that shone over queens and farmers, priests and craftsmen, children and kings. The same stars that watched history unfold beside the Nile. And somewhere in that peaceful darkness, the echoes of these remarkable women remain. Not loud. Not demanding. Simply present. Like the soft sound of water moving through the night. Like a distant memory carried by the wind. Like the Nile itself. Endless. Gentle. And never truly gone.